The Personal Diary of Private Thomas Ashworth, 2nd Battalion. Recovered from the Gallipoli Peninsula, 1915. March 3rd. I have been trying to calculate the distance from the edge of my trench to the edge of theirs. I have been staring at it for 6 days now, and I keep arriving at the same number. 8 meters. Perhaps 9 on the right side where the ground dips slightly. But 8, mostly. 8 meters of open ground that neither side has managed to cross and neither side has stopped trying to cross. 8 meters. I can hear them breathe at night. Not individual breaths, but the collective sound of men existing very close to you in the dark. The shifting, the coughing, the occasional low voice saying something in a language I cannot understand. I have started to recognize some of the voices without knowing any of the words. There is one man, deep voice, laughs quietly at things, seems to laugh often for someone living in a trench whom I have been listening to for 6 days without ever seeing his face. I think about that more than I should. March 7th. Jimmy Patterson had a theory about angles. He had been developing it for 3 days, the idea that if you came up on the left side of the sandbag, there was a blind spot in their sight line, that the geometry of it made you invisible for the 2 or 3 seconds you needed to look over. He had explained it to all of us at least 4 times, drawing diagrams in the mud with his finger, growing more confident with each explanation, the way people do when no one has yet proven them wrong. He was 19 years old. From a small town in Yorkshire. He had a photograph of his mother in his front pocket and a habit of humming the same 4 bars of a song he could never remember the rest of, over and over, until the men around him were ready to climb out of the trench voluntarily just for the silence. This morning he decided to test the theory one final time. I was 2 meters to his left when he went up. I saw it happen. I will not write what I saw. I will write only what came after, which was Jimmy sitting down very suddenly against the wall of the trench with an expression on his face that was not pain yet. Pain came later, briefly, but something more like surprise. The expression of a man who has just discovered a significant error in his calculations. He looked at me. I moved toward him and he said, very clearly and almost conversationally, "Tell my mum the angle was wrong." Those were the last words he said. I sat with him until it was over, which was not long. I held his hand, which is not something men here do, but Jimmy was 19 and from Yorkshire, and he had been humming the same 4 bars for 11 days, and his mother's photograph was still in his front pocket, and I held his hand, and I am not ashamed of it. Afterward I sat against the wall of the trench for a long time. I thought about the angle theory. About how certain he had been, about how certainty, in this place, is the most dangerous thing a man can carry. I wrote the letter to his mother that night. I told her he died quickly and without suffering. I told her he was brave and that his friends were with him. I did not mention the angle. I did not mention the expression on his face. I did not mention that I held his hand, or that I have been sitting here for 3 hours since and cannot stop seeing it. The sitting down, the surprise, the clarity of those last words, as if somewhere in the final seconds his mind had sorted through everything and decided that the most important thing was to correct the record. Tell my mum the angle was wrong. I will not tell his mother that. But I will not forget it either. March 11th. Something strange happened today. There was a ceasefire. Not an official one, nothing arranged by officers. Just a cessation, the way a storm sometimes stops between two waves. It began around midday when the shelling paused and neither side immediately filled the silence with rifle fire, and then the silence stretched, 1 minute, 2, 5, and nobody wanted to be the one to end it. I looked over the parapet. They were looking back. I do not know what I expected. I had been living 8 meters from these men for 11 days, and in that time I had constructed a version of them assembled entirely from sounds and fear and the things men say about enemies when they are trying to work up the will to kill them. I expected that version. What I saw was men. Tired men. Dirty men. Men who looked back at me with the same expression I could feel on my own face, which I can only describe as, oh. One of them held something up. A cigarette. March 11th continued. His name, I later learned, is Murd. He is 24. He has a sister in a city I cannot pronounce and a father who keeps goats and a sweetheart whose name he told me but I could not hear properly over the distance, so I nodded as though I had. We stood on opposite sides of 8 meters and conducted an entire conversation in a language neither of us spoke. Gesture, expression, the universal semaphore of two men trying to be human at each other across a trench. He gave me a cigarette. I gave him a piece of chocolate I had been saving since February. I do not know why I had been saving it, there is nothing to save it for here, but I had been, and giving it to Murd felt like the correct use for it. He bit into it and his face did something I cannot describe. Not just the taste. Something about being given a thing by a person. We stood there until an officer shouted at me from behind and an officer shouted at him from behind, and we both went back into our respective trenches like men returning from a dream. I lay on my back in the mud and looked at the narrow strip of sky above the trench and thought, he has a sister and a father and a sweetheart whose name I couldn't hear. I thought, tomorrow I will try to kill him. I could not make these two things fit together. I tried for a long time. They did not fit. March 14th. There was another ceasefire today. Longer 3 hours, arranged properly, for the collection of the dead. We buried our men. They buried theirs. We worked in parallel, 30 feet apart, performing the same task with the same faces. There is a specific expression that men wear when they are carrying the dead. I recognized it on their faces because I could feel it on mine. Murd found me in the middle of it. He looked different standing up, in full view, in daylight. Taller than I had imagined from his voice. Dark eyes doing what all of our eyes were doing that day, trying not to show what they were seeing. We shook hands. His hand was exactly as rough and cold as mine. His friend, young, couldn't have been more than 17, still had the face of a boy who hasn't finished becoming a man. Brought tea. Small glasses, passed across the distance with careful ceremony. I drank it. It was very good tea. I thought, I am drinking tea with a man I will try to shoot tomorrow. I thought, he knows this. He is drinking tea with me anyway. I drank the tea. March 15th. The ceasefire ended at dawn. I was awake for it. Had been awake most of the night, listening to the sounds from the other trench, trying to identify Murd's voice in the dark. The first shot came at 5:47. I noted the time because I had been watching my watch, which is something you do when you are waiting for something you do not want to arrive. Within 2 minutes it was as it had always been. I fired my rifle. This is what they do not tell you about war: the training works. The training works because it creates distance between the action and its meaning. The body performs the mechanics while the mind stays occupied elsewhere. You aim. You fire. You reload. You do not think about the voice that laughs quietly at things. You do not think about rough cold hands and good tea and a name you couldn't hear. You aim. You fire. You reload. It works. I hate that it works. March 19th. Murmd is still alive. I know this because I heard him today. The laugh, unmistakable, responding to something in the other trench. Short, cut off quickly, as if he remembered where he was. But there. I did not examine what I felt when I heard it. I noted it in this diary instead, which is perhaps the same thing. March 23rd. Corporal Davies asked me today why I write so much. I told him I was keeping a record. He asked, a record of what? I looked at the 8 meters between us and the trench opposite and thought about Murmd's handshake and the boys' tea and Jimmy Patterson's last words and the 4 letters I have written to mothers and the way the ceasefire ended at 5:47, and I thought, all of it. I am keeping a record of all of it, because if I don't write it down I am afraid of what it becomes inside a man when it has nowhere to go. I told Davies, just things. He nodded and went back to cleaning his rifle. March 28th. Another ceasefire. 2 hours. Murmd was at the edge of his trench almost immediately. We stood at our respective edges in the late afternoon light and I raised one hand, which is not a wave exactly but is the thing you do when you want to acknowledge a person and have no other tools available. He raised his. 2 men with their hands in the air on opposite sides of a trench. From a distance it must have looked like surrender. From close up it looked like something else entirely. Something I still don't have a word for. Then his officer called him back and my officer called me back. We lowered our hands and went. April 2nd. I have been trying to write this entry for 3 days. There was an assault on the night of March 30th. I will not describe the assault. What I will describe is the morning after, which was very quiet in the way that mornings after are quiet, a silence that is not peaceful but empty, the silence of subtraction. I listened for the laugh. I listened the morning of the 31st. All of that day. The night. The full day of April 1st and its night. I catalogued every sound from the other trench the way I have always catalogued them, checking each voice against my memory of his, finding none of them to be the right one. I wrote nothing in this diary because there was nothing I was able to write. What I did instead was this: I took out the letter I had been composing in my head for weeks, the one I would write to someone if Murmd had an address I could send a letter to, if there existed a postal service between enemy trenches, if the world were arranged differently than it is. I composed it very carefully in my mind, every word, and then I did not write it down because there was nowhere to send it, and some things are more honest when they remain unwritten. I thought about his sister, his father and the goats, the sweetheart whose name I never caught. I thought about the chocolate, about his face when he tasted it, not just the taste, but the being given something. That specific expression that I have been carrying for 3 weeks and will probably carry for much longer than that. I sat with it the way I sat with Jimmy. Not looking away. April 3rd. He laughed today. Just once. Short, cut off. But unmistakably his. I put down my rifle and sat against the wall of the trench and closed my eyes and stayed like that for a long time, long enough that Davies came over and put a hand on my shoulder without saying anything, which is the most any of us can offer each other, and which was, on this particular morning, exactly enough. April 9th. I have been thinking about the men who started this. Not the soldiers did not start this. The soldiers are here because a sequence of decisions made by people in rooms that do not look like this, in chairs that do not feel like this, produced a situation where young men from places that had no quarrel with each other ended up 8 meters apart with rifles. I think about what it means that Murmd and I can drink tea and shake hands and stand in the afternoon light with our hands raised, and still, the next morning, aim rifles at each other. What it says about men, not about Murmd, not about me, but about what men can hold inside themselves simultaneously. The contradictions they can contain without breaking. Or perhaps we are breaking. Perhaps the not breaking is itself a kind of breaking, just slower. The kind that doesn't announce itself until a man is home, in a room that doesn't look like this, and something ordinary happens, a sound, a smell, light at 5:47 in the morning, and everything that has been waiting comes through at once. I am 22 years old. Jimmy Patterson was 19 and from Yorkshire, and he hummed 4 bars of a song he could never finish, and he died surprised, which is perhaps the best any of us can hope for, to be surprised by it, to not have seen it coming for so long that it stopped surprising you. I think about him more than I write about him. April 14th. Last entry for a while. We are being moved. This morning before the move I went to the edge of the trench. Murmd was there. I don't know how he knew. Perhaps he didn't. Perhaps he goes to the edge every morning, and today I happened to also be there, and what felt like a goodbye was just 2 men at the edge of their trenches in the early light. I looked at him for a long time. He looked at me. I raised my hand. He raised his. I picked up my kit and walked away. I didn't look back. I've thought about why since, and I can only say this: Jimmy looked at me at the end, and I have been carrying that look for 5 weeks, the surprise in it, the correction he needed to make. Some things you carry better when you don't watch them go. Murmd's hand raised in the early light. That is the last thing I have of him. I am keeping it exactly as it is. The remaining pages of this diary are blank.